So we're in the book of Proverbs tonight in chapter 11. We're in the verses 10 through 15. And we've got the question in Proverbs 11, 10 through 15 of what is it that you should put your trust in? What is worthy of trusting in and putting your faith in? And these verses read, "When it goes well with the righteous, the city rejoices. And when the wicked perish, there is jubilation. By the blessing of the upright, the city is exalted, but it is overthrown by the mouth of the wicked. He who is devoid of wisdom despises his neighbor, but a man of understanding holds his peace. A talebearer reveals secrets, but he who is of a faithful spirit conceals a matter. When there is no counsel, the people fall, but in the multitude of counselors there is safety. Oh, he who is a surety for a stranger will suffer, but one who hates being surety is secure." I've titled this lesson "Righteousness and Guidance," and all of these verses, they're a little bit disjointed, but they come together to talk to us about a basic reality, which is that only God and the wisdom he brings should be what we put our trust in. You can't trust in strangers. You can't trust in men. You can't trust in money. You can't trust basically anything physical. The only thing that's going to be the same tomorrow as it is today is God. And he starts this off by talking about the righteous and the wicked. And he talks about it in the context of a city, which we can understand to not just be about a city, but about nations as a whole. And so it's what's called a synecdoche. You're using a part to stand in for something greater. You can also use the whole to stand in for a part. There's stuff that we do all the time that's like that. For instance, it's not so much in common parlance anymore, but people used to say you have nice threads, and they're using the threads of your coat or whatever it is to refer to the entire thing. That's a synecdoche. And so that's all it is. It's a fancy word to talk about a form of language. But he's using cities here to talk about nations and what a nation's reaction should be to good men. And the general reaction to a good man's death and a wicked man's death is reversed. Now, what I mean by that is that when a good man dies, people should be sorrowful, they should mourn, and when a wicked man dies, well, there's sort of two reactions that take place, and they're kind of contradictory. One, you mourn the soul that's just been lost, a soul that has unfortunately gone in a way that it can no longer be reached. But the other thing to worry about, or the other thing to approach it with, is if the wicked man dies, he's no longer here to spread his wickedness and his misery. It's that conflicting reaction whenever the United States military goes overseas and takes out some big name terrorist, right? On the one hand, it's great that they're no longer here terrorizing people and blowing things up and damaging people. But on the other hand, that is a person made in the image of God who is no longer able to be saved. Not that they were really all that receptive to the words of God anyway. But when it goes well with the righteous, the city rejoices, and when the wicked perish, there is jubilation. By the blessing of the upright, the city is exalted, and is overthrown by the mouth of the wicked. And it should be the way of the world that we rejoice when righteous men are doing well, and we rejoice when wicked men are not doing well, because a righteous man is what carries the nation into the future. There's all sorts of quotes about this kind of concept. A society is doing well when fathers are planting trees under whose shade they will never sit. And it's that kind of idea, is people who plan for the future, people who are putting priority on others rather than themselves. These are the kind of men who carry societies well into the future and past their own life expectancy. Indeed, when wicked men get the final say, and that's kind of what it means by overthrown by the mouth of the wicked, when wicked men are the ones getting the final say in a culture, that culture and its people are doomed. I can't help but, when I'm reading these verses, think of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? They're this sort of the classic example of wicked men who have so overrun a city that there is not even 10 righteous men left in that city. You can do the calculations, and you can say it's Lot's wife, that's 2. Lot's 2 daughters, that's 4. And if you're being very generous, Lot's daughters' fiancés. And so that's six people. We couldn't get 4 besides them. Right? And so that's the sad state of affair in all sorts of cultures. And you know that your culture is on its way out when that initial proverb is reversed. When it goes well with the righteous, the city is disheartened. It's depressed. And if the wicked perish, then there is sorrow and not this jubilation. That's when you know that your culture is doomed. He continues to talk about righteousness and living in peace with your neighbors in a society. And he says, he who is devoid of wisdom despises his neighbor, but a man of understanding holds his peace. A talebearer reveals secrets, but he who is of a faithful spirit conceals a matter. Now, what Solomon is not advocating for here is lying. There's all sorts of proverbs in which he talks poorly about lying. And so you cannot understand verse 13 in the context of lying is, in fact, the opposite of being a faithful man or a trustworthy man, to lie about a matter. And so what he's saying in these verses, in the first one, that even if something is true, it doesn't necessarily need to be harped on at all times. And so he who is devoid of wisdom despises his neighbor. You're kind of stuck with your neighbor. And so it's kind of foolish to have some kind of feud with your neighbor, insofar as that's your call to make. If your neighbor wants to constantly have beef with you, then there's not too much you can do about it. But if you're part of the problem, and you probably normally are in a dynamic like that, if you're part of the problem, then it makes a lot more sense to, stop being part of the problem. Stop despising your neighbor, and instead be a man of understanding. Hold your peace. And verse 13 is twofold. And so in the first part, even if something is true, even if there are parts of your neighbor that deserve to be called out and to be despised, it doesn't need to be repeated ad nauseum. But if something is false, then it definitely doesn't need to be repeated, right? That's a talebearer reveals secrets. And so the idea is there's somebody who's going around and telling lies, and he finds out something that's true, and he goes and he spreads that as well. Well, neither of those things needed to be done. He didn't need to be telling the lies, and he doesn't need to be spreading this truth thing. Instead, a trustworthy man, or he who is trustworthy, or he who is of a faithful spirit, conceals a matter. Trustworthy men are capable of practicing discernment on what must be public and what shouldn't be public, right? If you find out that your neighbor has a very weird hobby that would be frowned upon in public, but it's not really hurting anybody, you don't really need to be spreading that around. You can sort of keep it to yourself and be quiet about it. Now, if you find out that he's some sort of mass murderer, a serial killer, yeah, you probably should go tell somebody about that. That's not what Solomon's talking about here either. What Solomon is talking about is you don't need to be stirring up trouble in the community when there doesn't need to be trouble stirred up in the community. Instead, where there is no counsel, the people fall, but in the multitude of counselors there is safety. Solomon instead advises us, instead of going around and being a busybody and spreading lies or spreading information that's going to hurt somebody, instead you need to listen to people who have wisdom. When there is no counsel, the people fall, but in the multitude of counselors there is safety. See, no matter how wise you are, people looking at problems from various angles are going to give insight. Solomon was a wise man, but even he had people who counseled him. Even he had advisors. We know he had advisors because his son, Rehoboam, had a choice between his advisors and his father's advisors. So Solomon had advisors. The wisest man on earth had people tell him other opinions besides his own. And so no matter how wise you are, having counsel it's wonderful. But in all of this counseling, in all of this going to other people for wisdom and listening to others, he who is a surety for a stranger will suffer, but one who hates being surety is secure. Solomon says, in all of this wisdom seeking, though, here's a piece of advice. Don't yoke yourself to a stranger. Don't put all of your blind faith in somebody that you've never met, even if you think that you know them, right? There's actually quite a bit of a problem with this nowadays in this age of digital media. There's people who listen to people on the internet for forever, and they really like their opinions, and so they attach themselves to these people, and they say, well, whatever he says, I'm going to go along with. Well, you can't do that because, well, here's a nasty little secret, people are going to let you down. There's no such thing as a perfect person. And so at some point, that person is going to have an opinion, or that person is going to do something that they shouldn't have done, and now you've attached yourself to them. And so you can gain wisdom from them. In fact, Solomon tells us to gain wisdom from everyone and from all people, but don't attach yourself, don't yoke yourself to a stranger. Instead, focus on God and trusting in him, because there is one person who's never going to let you down. That's the Godhead. That's the Father, that's the Son, that's the Spirit. And so as we approach this question of righteousness and guidance, Solomon approaches it both from heaven and from earth. And on earth, the answer is, well, righteous men exalt a nation. And if you have a bunch of righteous people and it's all going well for the righteous people, your nation, a rising tide lifts every ship, right? But if your nation is wicked, well, that's terrible. Things are going to be going very poorly very shortly. And even if something is true, you don't need to be stirring the pot, so to speak, with your neighbors. You don't need to be bringing everything to the surface all the time. And you should listen to people and gain wisdom from them, but don't yoke yourself to them. Don't attach yourself to somebody that you barely know. Instead, yoke yourself to God. When we approach our daily lives, do we appreciate all the things righteous living brings us? Indeed, we should trust in God and in his commandments. Thank you. Almost dropped that there. It's always a bit awkward ending this without a proper invitation. But just because no one in this room needs to be baptized tonight doesn't mean that there isn't necessarily a need for prayers or anything that we could provide. If you're watching online and you need anything, you can let us know, and we'll try our best to help you out. But if there's anyone here who needs anything that the church here can help them with, we do urge you to come forward as we stand.